Judge Grayson believed he was dealing with an inexperienced teenager until the accused began breaking down the prosecution's argument with the skill of an experienced attorney. The atmosphere within the Los Angeles County courtroom was heavy and oppressive. Spectators packed the benches, whispering quietly as they observed the proceedings. The defendant's table appeared oversized for the young man beside it, his hands resting in his pockets, his head held high, showing no signs of fear. Jalen Dawson, 19 years old, faced charges of vehicle theft and resisting arrest. While the accusations were severe, Judge Walter Grayson's expression made it evident that the real judgment had little connection to legal matters. Grayson reclined in his seat, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the polished wooden surface of his bench. He gazed down at Jaylen through his spectacles, his mouth forming something between a grin and a scowl. "Do you believe you possess some form of legal expertise?" His tone held dry entertainment. "This is not a discussion forum, child." Soft laughter echoed through the room. The bailiff, court reporter, and even the district attorney were participating in the mockery. Jaylen remained composed. He wasn't amused. He had dedicated years getting ready for this situation. Not this precise scenario. He never intended to find himself here as an accused person. However, he understood the courtroom environment intimately. While other teenagers memorized sports statistics, he studied legal precedents. While his peers engaged in gaming, he conducted mental mock proceedings, debating fictional cases with himself. His mother, Denise Dawson, had served as a legal assistant for more than 2 decades, and Jaylen had matured hearing the accounts she shared from work, about prosecutors taking shortcuts, judges showing favoritism, and defense lawyers barely making efforts. He internalized everything. By age 14, he could analyze a trial more effectively than most law school students. Nevertheless, none of this impressed Grayson. To the judge, Jaylen was simply another troubled youth. "Let us expedite this process," the judge sighed, opening the case folder. "I have a golf appointment at 2 o'clock. The audience laughed once more. However, this time, something changed. Jaylen's mouth curved into a slight, barely visible smile because Grayson had just committed his initial error. The courtroom remained unaware. The prosecutor, Mitchell Carrington, stood up with the demeanor of someone who had already secured victory. His clothing was immaculate, his necktie perfectly arranged, and his voice carried the practiced assurance of someone who had given the identical presentation numerous times. "Your Honor, the state will demonstrate conclusively that the defendant, Jalen Dawson, was discovered in possession of a stolen automobile. A 2022 Audi A6 reported missing mere hours prior to his apprehension. Law enforcement pursued him through the city center where he allegedly tried to escape before being captured. His fingerprints were discovered on the vehicle's steering mechanism. The prosecution maintains that the evidence is self-explanatory." The statement carried significant impact. The gallery audience stirred, murmuring amongst themselves. Superficially, it appeared incriminating. A stolen automobile. A pursuit. Attempted escape. Judge Grayson looked at Jaylen over his glasses, then returned his attention to Carrington. "Continue." The prosecutor approached the jury section, his polished footwear echoing on the floor. "The defense might attempt to persuade you that this was merely a misunderstanding, that Mr. Dawson is some unlucky casualty of circumstances." He pivoted, making direct eye contact with Jaylen for the first time. "However, let us be realistic. What type of victim flees from law enforcement?" The room's tension intensified. Judge Grayson leaned closer, supporting his chin with his hand. Jaylen maintained steady eye contact. Carrington proceeded, reviewing a collection of documents. "Your Honor, I present the testimony of Officer Daniel Ruiz, who directly observed the defendant operating the vehicle before he attempted to flee. The automobile was verified as stolen. The arrest followed proper procedures." Grayson breathed out through his nose, nodding in agreement. "This appears straightforward to me, and for most people present, it likely seemed that way." The case appeared clear. A stolen vehicle, a chase, an arrest. However, Jaylen had spent too many years examining trials not to notice the weaknesses. Still, he remained quiet, observing, anticipating. Judge Grayson lightly struck his gavel. Very well, let us hear the defense's argument. He addressed Jalen's attorney, a public defender named Lisa Thornton, who had spoken fewer than 3 words since entering the courtroom. She rose, shifting uncomfortably. Your Honor, my client. Jaylen placed his hand on her arm, a quiet signal. She paused, then resumed her seat, and for the first time, Jaylen addressed the court. I will be representing myself, Your Honor. The room became completely quiet. Grayson stared at him, obviously entertained. You will what? Jalen's voice remained calm and controlled. I will be conducting my own defense. Murmurs spread throughout the courtroom. The bailiff's eyebrows rose sharply. Carrington's smirk wavered momentarily before he released a harsh laugh. This ought to be entertaining. However, nobody was laughing when Jaylen took his initial step forward because everything was about to transform. The courtroom's gravity surrounded Jaylen as he adjusted his position, his hands remaining in his pockets. He allowed the quiet to extend slightly longer, enough to create discomfort. Then, at last, he spoke. Your Honor, before I commence, I would like to verify something with the prosecution. Carrington lifted an eyebrow, folding his arms. Proceed. Jaylen took a deliberate step forward. You stated that Officer Daniel Ruiz personally observed me operating the vehicle before my arrest. Is that accurate? Carrington exhaled sharply, already seeming disinterested. That is correct. And that testimony is documented in his report. Naturally it is. Jaylen nodded, then addressed Judge Grayson. Your Honor, I request dismissal of that testimony as evidence. Grayson squinted at him. On what basis? Jaylen removed his hands from his pockets for the first time and gestured toward the prosecution's table. Because Officer Ruiz never observed me in that automobile. Actually, he was not even working when the pursuit commenced. A hint of confusion appeared on Carrington's face. What are you discussing? Jaylen advanced another step. Your Honor, if the court permits, I would like to submit a request to examine Officer Ruiz's GPS records from that evening. If his report claims he witnessed me in the vehicle, then it should correspond with his location data. However, he allowed the word to linger in the air. I suspect it will not. Now the murmurs in the gallery became more pronounced. Grayson frowned, glancing toward Carrington. Counselor. Carrington cleared his throat, his jaw becoming tense. That report was completed by a law enforcement officer, Your Honor. Are we truly going to accept the statement of a defendant over a trained professional? Jaylen gave a small, almost nonchalant shrug. If the officer was positioned where he stated, then the GPS information will confirm it. However, if he was not, he let the sentence remain incomplete. Grayson examined him for an extended moment, then turned to Carrington. Does the prosecution object to verifying the officer's GPS records? Carrington hesitated. The delay was sufficiently long. The jury observed. The gallery observed, and most significantly, the judge observed. Jaylen took a quiet breath. He had spent years watching trials, studying prosecutors, their methods, the way they manipulated the system, and there was one thing he understood with certainty. If Carrington was confident in his case, he would not be delaying. Grayson sighed, massaging his temple. Counselor. Carrington finally shook his head. No objections, Your Honor, however the transformation had already started. For the first time, the courtroom was no longer laughing. The courtroom was silent, but the tension was deafening. Carrington shuffled his documents, his polished confidence beginning to fracture. Your Honor, while we await the GPS records, the reality remains that the defendant's fingerprints were discovered on the steering wheel of the stolen vehicle. Jaylen gave a small nod, his expression neutral. That is accurate. He stepped forward. However, let us discuss that evidence for a moment. Grayson raised an eyebrow, indicating for him to proceed. Jaylen turned to the jury, establishing eye contact with each member. The prosecution wants you to believe that discovering my fingerprints in an automobile means I took it. That is the narrative they are presenting. However, let us consider this rationally. He took a deep breath, maintaining his calm, controlled tone. Suppose you enter a department store and examine a jacket. You place your hands in the pockets, perhaps zip it up, then return it to the rack and exit. Several hours later, someone steals that jacket. Would the presence of your fingerprints on it indicate you stole it? Several jurors looked at each other. Someone in the gallery whispered something quietly. Jaylen did not allow them time to recover. The automobile in question was parked outside a convenience store hours before the alleged theft. I was inside that establishment with 3 companions. And yes, when we passed the car, I leaned on it. I even opened the door because it was already unlocked. I did not think much of it. Did not take the car. Did not drive it. Did not steal anything from inside. Just a foolish moment of curiosity. He let that settle for a moment. Then, in a voice that sliced through the silence like a blade, he asked, "Does touching something make you a criminal?" Carrington cleared his throat, searching through his notes, looking for something, anything, to regain control. Jaylen was not finished. "And while we are discussing this topic, let us talk about how that fingerprint examination was conducted." He turned to Grayson. "Your Honor, was the forensic expert from this case called to testify?" Grayson blinked, surprised by the question. He glanced at Carrington. The prosecutor hesitated, then reluctantly answered, "No." Jaylen's lips pressed together. "So, let me understand this correctly. The state is using forensic evidence to attempt to convict me, but they did not consider it necessary to bring the actual expert who processed that evidence. No opportunity for me to cross-examine, inquire about the chain of custody, or question the accuracy of the analysis." Carrington's jaw tightened. Jaylen nodded as if that was all he needed to hear. "Fascinating." Judge Grayson sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. It was the expression of a man realizing this case was not the simple victory he had expected it to be. However, Jaylen was not finished yet because the next thing he was about to reveal would change everything. Jaylen took a slow step forward, his voice steady but assertive. "Your Honor, I would like to present as evidence an official statement from the vehicle's owner." Judge Grayson frowned. "The owner?" Jaylen nodded. "Yes, Mr. Raymond Whitaker, the registered owner of the stolen Audi, provided a statement to the police that for some reason was never included in the prosecution's documents, and I believe I understand why." He turned to Carrington. "Do you remember what Mr. Whitaker told officers the night his car was reported stolen?" Carrington's jaw clenched. He knew exactly what was approaching. Jaylen did not wait for his response. Instead, he retrieved a printed transcript from his file and read aloud. "I left my car running when I went inside the gas station. Some kid must have jumped in and driven off. But it was not the guy you arrested. I saw the kid and he was white." A collective gasp spread through the courtroom. Jaylen held the paper up. "That is from the original police report. The same report the prosecution conveniently never referenced." He turned back to Judge Grayson. "The arresting officer excluded this from his testimony. The prosecution ignored it. And yet they want this jury to believe that I, someone who does not even match the description of the actual thief, was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt." Carrington stepped forward, desperately trying to recover. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant. The defendant was caught in possession of the vehicle," but Jaylen shook his head. "No, I was not." His voice did not increase in volume, but it cut through the courtroom with sharp accuracy. "I was arrested blocks away from where the vehicle was abandoned, walking home after purchasing snacks with my friends. I was not in the car. I was not near the car. I was not fleeing from anything. The only thing connecting me to this case is poor police work and assumptions." Judge Grayson released a slow breath, rubbing his temple. The case was falling apart rapidly, and everyone recognized it. Jaylen turned back to the jury. "The actual suspect escaped that night. The officers found a black youth in the same general vicinity, and decided that was sufficient. That is what this case is truly about." Silence. Grayson cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. "Does the prosecution have anything additional?" Carrington was rigid, his face reddened. "No, Your Honor. Judge Grayson exhaled. He looked at Jaylen for an extended time, then glanced at the jury. Finally, he leaned forward and spoke the words that would remain with everyone in that room. Case dismissed. A moment of shocked silence, then pandemonium. Half the courtroom erupted, some in disbelief, some in quiet relief. The gallery stirred, reporters writing in their notebooks. Jaylen did not move immediately. He let the moment settle. Let the reality register for everyone. Judge Grayson, still holding his gavel, looked at Jaylen with an indescribable expression. There was something in his eyes that had not been there before. Recognition, perhaps even remorse. Jaylen met his gaze, then turned to exit. However, just as he reached the door, the judge spoke again. Mr. Dawson? Jaylen stopped, but did not turn around. Grayson hesitated, then finally said, "You should consider law school." Jaylen smiled. He did not need to consider it. He was already pursuing that path. Outside the courthouse, the air was filled with voices. Reporters crowded the steps, their cameras flashing, microphones extended like weapons. "Jaylen, did you know the judge would dismiss the case? What are your plans now? How does it feel to outsmart an experienced prosecutor?" Jaylen pulled his hoodie over his head, ignoring the questions. He was not interested in the show. This was not about demonstrating his intelligence. It was about something more significant. His mother, Denise, was waiting for him at the bottom of the steps. Her arms were crossed, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, she just observed him. Then, finally, she shook her head and exhaled. "Boy, you frightened me terribly." Jaylen chuckled, scratching the back of his head. "Had to take a chance, Ma?" She stared at him a moment longer, then pulled him into a tight embrace. "You always were the headstrong one." The cameras continued flashing, but Jaylen was no longer paying attention to them. Across the street, standing by his car, Judge Grayson observed. His posture was different now. The arrogance was absent. His expression was no longer amused. It was something else, something closer to contemplation. He had not expected this case to be anything more than routine. Just another day, another defendant. Another guilty plea. But now he knew he would remember this one because Jaylen had accomplished something most people never could. He made the system examine itself, and for once it retreated first. Here is the lesson we should absorb. How many other cases had proceeded this way? How many people had been convicted not because of evidence, but because of prejudice, shortcuts, and a system that prioritized closing cases over discovering the truth? Jaylen had the knowledge to defend himself. But what about those who did not? This was not just about one case. It was about all of them. He knew what he had to do next. This courtroom would not be the last one he stood in. But next time, he would not be the defendant. He would be the lawyer. And when that day arrived, he would not be the only one. If this story made you think even for a moment, then share it. The justice system is founded on laws, but it is operated by people, and people can change, but only if we make them. Hit that like button, subscribe for more stories that matter, and let us keep the conversation going because next time it might not be Jaylen, it might be someone you know.